Hi, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I am going to teach you how to knit the Vanilla Mittens. So these mittens are constructed a little bit differently than regular mitten patterns that you might have made before. They have some additional details that make them fit better and be more comfortable. So as you can see, I'm holding up a sample here, and there is a right hand and a left hand to these mittens. If you look at your hand, the thumb does sit a little bit further forward than the rest of your fingers, so constructing the mittens in this way makes it more comfortable and feel more natural. These mittens also have some other details that really make them unique. One is the hidden increases to shape the thumb. These are hidden so that there's no holes and no gapping, so that it just stays a little bit extra warm. And as you can see, the bottom here is worked as a double, like a fold over cuff. So this is a little bit thicker and it will stay on and easily slide under jackets so that your wrist won't get cold. They're also knit densely in a smaller than recommended needle size for the yarn so that it's extra warm and comfortable. So these mittens are designed in 7 sizes, and as you can see here, this sample is the 8-inch mitten size. So how to measure and decide what size to make is you will wrap a measuring tape around your hand at the widest point before your fingers. So as you can see here, my hand is about 7.5 inches. So this 8-inch mitten fits perfectly. You just want to choose a size that it's about a 1/2 inch larger than your corresponding hand size. The circumference of the mitten cannot easily be adjusted, but the length of the mitten can easily be adjusted. So it's more important to choose a size based on the circumference of your hand. The yarn that we're going to be using is Originally Lovely Lana yarn, or you can use a similar Aran weight wool yarn. I really do recommend using this yarn or a wool because it will just be really nice and warm and durable. As you can see, these mittens are knit quite densely, as I mentioned before, so we are using a smaller than recommended needle size. These are always just a suggestion. Depending on the project you're making, you can use a bigger or a smaller knitting needle. So for the cuff itself, we're using a size US 4 knitting needle, and for the hand, we're using a size US 5 knitting needle. This just makes it really dense and extra warm, and then a little bit durable as well. This yarn is a non-superwash, so it will be a lot warmer, a lot more durable, and it will hold up over time. So the sample that I'm going to be making here is in the olive color, and I'm going to begin by creating a slip knot and putting that on my size 4 needles, so the smaller knitting needles that you're using. I'll do the slip knot a little bit slower here so that you can check it out. Just cross over, make a loop, and then pull through the end. I like to pull through, make my slip knot so that the strand I'm pulling is connected to the ball of yarn. This just makes it a little bit more secure. So now we will cast on the number for your chosen size. The full pattern for these mittens, I do want to mention, is available on my website, originallylovely.com, and is also available as you can purchase it as a printable PDF on Ravelry or Etsy or my website as well. So the cast on method that we're going to be using is backwards loop cast on. What this means is we're just basically making a loop, but it's twisted. So this cast on method is super simple, and it does matter because later on we're going to be working that fold over cuff that I mentioned earlier. And this is a really easy cast on method to pick up your stitches from. You could also use the provisional cast on method. Some people like to use that, but I find that it gets a little bit bunched up at the end and it's kind of hard to use and to pick up the stitches from. So depending on your size, you'll cast on the given number of stitches, and then I'm going to walk you through this sample using magic loop technique. You can use this pattern for double pointed needles or magic loop as I'm doing here. I will just quickly go over with you how to work the magic loop technique so that you can follow along as well. So once you have all your stitches cast on, you need to find the center, pull them over to the cord of your knitting needle. You want a long knitting needle for magic loop. And then find the center and split the cord through the center of the stitches. And then the tail end is going to be the first part that we're knitting, the first side. So the end connected to the tail, not connected to the ball of yarn, will be in the front, and then the end connected to the ball of yarn will be in the back. So push that needle all the way through and push those stitches connected to the tail end onto your needle, but leave the other ones back on the cord. So you can kind of see how I'm doing that. You do want to just make sure that you don't have any twists in your work. So generally what I do is I put all the end of the stitches, the cast on edge, towards the bottom. If it's facing the bottom on both ends, then it's not going to be twisted. Just really make sure you get that untwisted. That's the only main thing that I see people mess up with when they're starting magic loop. If you do have it twisted, there's no way to untwist it later on. So now we have all the stitches lined up here with the cast on edge towards the bottom of the needles. So as I mentioned, you will need just a long circular needle for this technique. I generally use a 32-inch or longer circular needle, and any shorter, it just gets a little bit harder to work the needles because you will hold those back stitches on the cord itself. So pull that back needle through, and that's going to be the needle that we work with. I'm going to adjust the camera here just a little bit so you can see further back and see how the needle cord actually goes into a figure 8. So the front stitches are on your front left needle, and then the back stitches are on that cord. They're being held onto the cord, and then your right needle is just pulled through the end of the figure 8, and then you're going to use that and knit those stitches from the left needle onto the right needle. So again, once you have it all adjusted, that's the biggest part, is setting it up and making sure you don't have any twists and kind of understanding the process. It's a little bit easier once you get going. So now we just begin knitting, and that's how we join in the round. You don't have to do anything specific to join your work. You just start knitting. So we're working in knit 1, purl 1, rib stitch. So there I knit my first stitch, and then this next one here I just purl. And that's how we joined in the round. So that strand that's connected to the ball of yarn, that's why we put it at the back, because now we're working across those front stitches and it's joining it together. That strand just comes across and holds it together so that it will be a spiral worked in the round. So you can see I'm working here, just knit 1, purl 1, rib stitch. I'm working kind of close to the end of the needles. I wouldn't necessarily do that if I were you, because if you do drop a stitch here, it is a little bit tricky to pick back up. But you can see there how it's just joined in the round by that strand coming across. You don't want to pull it super tight because then it will tighten up those back stitches. You just want to keep a nice even tension, not too tight, but definitely not too loose either. I don't ever find a hard time keeping the transition between the front needle and the back needle tight. I don't find that to be the case. If you do, then just make sure you're tightening up the second stitch, not the first stitch, because then it will make it too tight. So you can see here I have a few stitches worked, and just again that knit 1, purl 1, rib stitch. So when the purl bump is facing you, like these here that I'm pointing out, that means that it's a purl stitch. And then when the purl bump is near the back, that means that it's a knit stitch. That was something that always threw me off when I was learning to knit, so that's a good pointer to just keep in mind so that you can keep your place. Coming up to the very end of the first half of the stitches, we're still working that front needle. We have 2 left here, and as you can see, it kind of got a little bit loose, that transition between the front and the back stitches. Don't worry about that, it will even out and it will not be noticeable. So we got to the end of this first half of the row, And now what we're going to do is that back cord, we're actually going to, well, first we're going to turn it over, because now we're going to be adjusting it so that we're working across the front. The front stitches are going to be what were the back stitches on the left needle. So push that left needle through and slide it on to those stitches. It might be a little bit tight at the beginning because again, that strand got loose between them, but it will even out the tension. So slide those stitches onto what is now the front needle. Make sure they're all even again, just pointing towards the bottom. And then that back needle there, we're just going to pull out. And you're going to want to pull to about the halfway point of the cord so that you have a nice, that figure 8 loop again. And now you can see our left needle is on in our left hand, ready to work, and our right needle is open and it's ready to transfer the stitches over to the right needle, essentially. So we're going to begin just as we did on the first half. We're just going to begin working those stitches, and that joins it in the round. So again, don't worry about that strand between the front and the back needle being too loose, because it will, the tension will even out. You can see here, I'm kind of just pulling it off a little bit slowly, and that helps even it out as well. So we ended with a purl stitch last time, so now we're going to continue our knit 1, purl 1, rib stitch across. It's always a little bit difficult to get your magic loop set up, but once you have your magic loop technique set up and down and you're ready to go, it's pretty easy. And I know some people don't like to do it, and at that point you can use double pointed needles, but I really like this technique. I know a lot of knitters do actually like it and find it to be pretty quick and a little bit easier to handle than double pointed needles. So now you can see we're finished with our first round, and you can kind of see how all the stitches are still at the bottom. There's no twist in our work. So we're going to flip it over again, slide that front needle, what is now the front needle, all the way through our stitches, and then the back needle, pull it out and onto the center of the cord. And you just adjust it and get ready for that next round. It's going to look wider at this point than the cuff will actually be, and that's just because it's not really stretched. It's a little bit stretched out because we only have one row worked. So now coming on to work that next row again, we're just going to continue that knit 1, purl 1, rib stitch. You don't have to do anything special to join. You just start working your stitches and that joins the round together. So knit 1, purl 1, rib stitch across this round. And depending on the size that you're making, you will work between 3 and 4 inches in this, and that's going to make a 1.5 inch or a 2 inch cuff, that fold over cuff. If you're not working that fold over cuff, you can work just a couple inches here, however long you want your cuff to be. So you can see here as well, I pointed out before that when those purl bumps are facing you, that means that's a purl stitch. And when they're facing the back and you see the V and the purl bump is at the back, that means it's a knit stitch. So if you lose your place on what stitch you just worked, you can easily just look and see it and kind of read the stitches and know what stitch that you're on. So continuing all the way across. And I do want to mention, if you're working the 2-colored version of this pattern, you will be knitting with the color of the cuff now, and then later on we will switch to the color of the hand. So you can see we have our magic loop joined, and we're kind of at a good place now. You can see it start to shape. So you just work this for a few inches depending on your size. If you're working the 2-color version, you will need, for all colors, you need a ball of each color, a ball of yarn for the cuff and a ball of yarn for the hand. But depending on the size you're making, if you're just working a single solid colored version, you need between 1 and 2 balls of yarn. Most sizes you can make with just 1 ball of yarn, but some of them you do need 2 balls just to be sure that you don't run out. So a little bit further, you can see that I have 4 inches worked here, and this is as I mentioned, twice the length that we're going to need for the cuff, because we're going to be working the fold over cuff now at this point. So it's just that double layered fold over piece that makes it really stay on your hand a little bit more structured at the cuff. So I'm just showing you quickly. I generally do count my stitches just to make sure that between two mittens, I do have the same number. So if you're counting, just look for those V's. When you find the V, then you know that that's one stitch. And you can count your rows and make sure that you have the same number. Not everyone does this. A lot of people just measure, and that is totally fine too. So the way that we're going to be working this cuff is we're going to be folding it up from the bottom underneath, and we're going to be working that cast on edge with our current row to just kind of hold it together and make a little loop. Before we begin, we need to switch to our size 5 knitting needles. I'm using these Go knitting needles. They're really nice because you can just swap out the needles and keep it on the same cord. You don't have to do anything specific. So just quickly swapping out my needles to the size 5, and then I'm going to walk you through working the fold over cuff. So at this point, if you follow that first stitch, the ridge of, or the rib of that first stitch all the way down, then you can find exactly your first cast on stitch. So it's actually the one connected to the slip knot, which makes it really easy to find the first one. So what I like to do is just, I can generally see these pretty easily because I've been doing it. I've done a lot of these fold over edges, but if you're just starting, if this is your first fold over edge, you can actually insert a stitch marker into that first stitch so that when you do fold it up, it will look a little bit different, and then you just instantly know right where the first one is. So just slide in that removable stitch marker there, as I've done here, into that first stitch, and you know that's the first loop we're picking up. The slip knot is a little bit harder to see, but after that, you actually have really obvious spots to pick up. And this is why I love this cast on method for anything double brim or double cuff, because it's just super obvious. There's those loops right there at the beginning that are that cast on edge, and it makes it really seamless and not very chunky either. So it just really nicely joins you, so you can see those going across the bottom if you look. So now we just need to adjust and pull that bottom piece up at the inside and kind of adjust it here. You can see it takes a little bit of maneuvering to get this step, but it really is a little detail that just adds to the finished piece. So there we have that first stitch we put our stitch marker on. Just slide that onto your left needle. So pull it up and then put that loop, that first loop, onto your left needle there. And then the tail, this is kind of different, a little bit kind of like cheating a little bit, but you can take that tail and just tuck it between into that, what will be the cuff. So it's actually just inside there. You don't need to weave in any end then. This is another reason I like to make the end of the slip knot the side that you tighten connected to the ball of yarn, so it's just a little more secure. So once we have that loop on our needle, we're going to knit that together with our first stitch. So just knit those two strands together as though they're one and take it off. So now we have that first edge knit together with our first stitch. So now you can see here we're finding the next loop right there. It looks like a knit ridge because it's reversed, it's folded up. So the next stitch is purl, so it's going to look like that loop is connected to a knit stitch. And we're knitting all of these stitches now. We're working in stockinette stitch, no more rib stitch. So you can see that next stitch there. And then if you pull it up and kind of see, we have our next loop right there. It looks like it's connected to the purl ridge. So just insert that needle. You can use your right needle to help kind of lift it up, or you can use your left needle. It's a little bit tricky sometimes using your right needle, so I also sometimes just use my left needle and put it in. It doesn't matter, whichever works for you. You just want to pull it up onto that left needle and then knit it together with that next stitch. So now you can see here we have a purl bump. And then this next stitch here, if you pull it out, you can see it's connected to that knit rib because it's like the underside. And you can see each loop right there. It's just ready to go and it's super obvious. Again, that's why I love this cast on method, the backwards loop cast on, for making a double or fold over cuff. You can use this in other patterns as well. You can use it for necklines, hats, whatever you like to make. It's just kind of a good little technique to have knowledge of. So just continue across each stitch. You're knitting the cast on edge together with the current stitch that you're working. It does take a little bit of time. It's kind of a slow round, but just keep going and you'll be really pleased with the process. I do want to mention that if you are working the 2-color version, you will want to be working your main color right now. If you don't switch at this row, that's fine. You can switch on the next row, but you will need to switch to your accent color for the 2-colored version at this point. So continuing all the way across, working each stitch together with the previous stitch, a little bit sped up here, all the way across that row. And you can really see now that we have some stitches developed how it's starting to form. Coming up to the end of this row, you can see it's held up there and you can kind of get a good look of what your fold over cuff will look like. So now, just as we have been working magic loop at this point, we have to turn it over and adjust our needles. Like so. That front needle you just push through on the stitches and then pull that back needle out, and then we have the next row of stitches to work just as we've done on the first half of this row, or round, I should mention. So kind of pull it up and then you can kind of stretch it to see those edges if you need. So this first one here, it's a knit ridge. So then we're following, matching up the reverse of it so it looks like a purl ridge on the back there. You can just pick up that loop and put it on your left needle and knit it together with the next stitch. So you probably have a pretty good grasp of this method now. So I am going to zoom forward a little bit so that I can show you the next piece. Just continue, pick up each stitch and knit it together with the next stitch and continue across your row in this way. Again, working in stockinette stitch, so it's knitting each stitch. Speeding up a little bit here. You just want to go nice and slow and make sure that you find the right stitch to work into. Coming up to the very last one. The last one's always a little bit hard to find, but it is there. It's just right next to that slip knot. It's a little bit lower, always tucked down, because it didn't necessarily get that tail strand to go over it. So now we have our fold over cuff completed, and you can see it's just like a 2-layer extra stretchy piece to hold your mitten on around your wrist. And this really does just give it like a unique look, a well-designed look, and it really is a very beautiful functional mitten. So you can take out that stitch marker now if you want. You can leave it there if you think that you'll have a hard time telling the beginning and end of your round, which side is the beginning and end of the round. I like to take mine off, but you can leave it on if needed. So now we're just going to continue working in stockinette stitch for a few rows. This depends on your size, how many rows that you need to work in stockinette stitch, but that just means knit every stitch on every row. So we just need to work a little bit here before we begin shaping the right and the left mitten. So no more rib stitch, just straight knit all of those stitches. And again, working in your main color, so the part for your hand now, if you have not already switched. So now we have the fold over cuff, and then we have the beginning of the hand worked. You can see here, I'm going to show you just quickly how many rows and how you can count your rows. You can just look for those V's again. So each row makes a V. So there's each row there. You don't have to count the loop that's on your needle because that's not a finished row. It will become a row after you work the next row. So adjust your needles here, and now we're going to make one left hand and one right hand. So this sample that I'm showing you, I'm going to be making a right hand. So if you're following along with the written directions, this just kind of dictates the placement of the thumb. It's really not that different. You can see here I have the left mitten shaped, so the left thumb is on the left side. Now this one, I will do the right hand, so the thumb will be on the right side. So we have to do a setup row. You want 2 stitch markers for this part. We're just going to slip that first stitch purlwise with the working yarn in back. Unless noted, you always leave the working yarn in its previous position. So this one we're slipping it working yarn in back. Now we're putting a stitch marker on, and now knit 3. Just knit 3 stitches like general, and then put that next stitch marker on after those 3 stitches. This is just our setup round. So we're just setting up those stitch markers so that we can shape the thumb after this round. Slip that next stitch after you place the stitch marker, and then continue across in stockinette stitch. Just knit all of those stitches to finish the round. So complete across this row, and then adjust your needles and work towards the end of the round. That's just the setup row, and now we actually get into the increases for the mitten, and I will show you how to make those invisible increases just like we've done, or like I showed you at the beginning. So now adjust your needles, and for round 1, we're actually going to be making stitches. So we're going to do a make one left and a make one right. And the markers are what will note where we're going to make one left, make one right. So that stitch we slipped last time, now we knit that stitch. So knit 1, and then we slip that marker, and now we have to make one left. So we're making it towards the thumb stitches. So you just pick up that stitch from front to back, put it on your left needle, and now knit through the back. So make one left, pick it up from front to back, knit through the back. And then that just makes like a little left angle with your make one. And you can see there the slip stitch will kind of go over it. You might see a slight hole now, but the slip stitch will kind of scoot over and cover that increase so that it won't really have any hole. So now we knit to the next marker, and now that strand we're going to make one right. So we're going to insert our hook from back to front. See how I lifted it up with my right needle and I put it on my left needle? So on the left needle it's back to front, and now we knit through the front to make one right. It's a little bit tight always. Make one rights are a little bit tighter than make one lefts. It looks like my camera got slightly out of focus, but you can see there make one right. So now instead of just 3 stitches between the stitch markers, we have 5. So we've increased 2 stitches for this round. And now we slip that marker and knit that slip stitch, and we actually knit until the end of the round. So this whole round we knit, and that is our first increase round, round 1 for our right hand. Left hand will be a little bit different, but the concept is the same. It's basically just the placement of the increases and the stitch markers. So continuing across this row, I'm going to zoom forward just a little bit because we just knit the rest of that round, and then we go on to round 2. So the increases are a 2-round repeat that you're going to repeat a certain number of times depending on the size of mitten that you are making. So for round 2, that first stitch, we slip that first stitch purlwise, slip that marker, and then knit to the next marker. So there's 5 for this round. It will depend, just knit to marker, and then you slip that next marker, and then you slip that next stitch, another slip stitch, and then just knit to the end of the round again. So pretty straightforward. It's just the 2 round repeat to shape the thumb. So zooming a little bit ahead here, coming to the end of that round, you can see that we have our thumb starting to shape the increases for the thumb. So again, depending on your size, you're going to repeat those last 2 rows between 4 and 6 more times, and that will just shape that thumb area. And the slip stitches, as you can see here, now that we've got a little further, they do kind of overlap those make one stitches, so there isn't a hole, and it will just, if you can still see a hole, if you continue, it will become a little bit less pronounced, and it just covers it up so that you don't have a hole in your mitten to make your thumb cold, to make your hands cold. So continue across, and then you can see here, I guess, how it developed, how it's shaped. You can see those slip stitches kind of overlapping the make ones, and then if you pull it out, you can see those make one stitches more clearly, and this is how they normally look, with just those slight little tiny holes. Make ones have the smallest hole of any increase, but it does still exist. And then over there as well, if you pull out, you can kind of see those make one stitches, but the slip stitch does hide it underneath. This is just one of those little details with this pattern that really makes it a special pattern and a nice, beautiful mitten. So you can see here the part that we're shaping with those increases, it just allows for like a little bit more space for the thumb, because your hand does get wider where your thumb is, so you need more stitches there. So as I mentioned, you will just repeat those last 2 rounds depending on your size, and then this is how it will start to look. You'll have more stitches, and it will kind of be like this triangle that goes out. Those stitches between the stitch markers are actually going to become the thumb, and then you will join back and work the rest of the hand. So these stitches we're going to set aside and leave those for the thumb. So you need a stitch holder or a piece of scrap yarn. Either one is fine. I always just use a piece of scrap yarn because I have it handy sitting by me. So just use one in a different color generally, so it's easier to see your stitches when you go back and pick them up. So now we will just begin that next round. So we're going to knit 1, and then you can remove that stitch marker. You don't need it at this point. And then slip the stitches between the stitch markers onto that scrap yarn or stitch holder. Just make sure that that first stitch doesn't fall off the needle, kind of pull it out a little bit. So slip those next however many stitches, depending on your size, onto your scrap yarn. We're just going to keep these live stitches. They're not cast off or anything, so we call them live stitches. Slip those next live stitches onto your scrap yarn, and we will just set these aside to come back and work the thumb later. So we work the thumb at the end, and then we finish the hand of the mitten while these are just hanging out waiting for us to come back. So slip all of those stitches, just slip them purlwise with your needle so that you're not changing the orientation of them at all. And just up until that next marker, you can remove that marker and pull that left needle through a bit so that you don't lose any stitches, and pull through your scrap yarn. Definitely use a longer piece if you have one, but this is just what I had handy. And then tie a little knot just to keep it secure so that you don't lose any stitches. And this is our thumb set aside to come back and be worked later. So now we will join over to the rest of the hand. But first we have to cast on 3 stitches. This gives kind of like a 3-dimensional look to the hand, a 3-dimensional feel and fit. It just makes it a little bit more comfortable and fit your hand better because your thumb is not flat. So turn it over and do 3 stitches, cast on 3 stitches, backwards loop. You don't have to turn it over, but I kind of think that casting on from the back is just easier because we have a lot in the way from the front. So once again, just backwards loop cast on method, make that loop and then put it through your needle. Just cast on 3 stitches, not many, just a couple. 3 stitches for all sizes. And now we will begin and work across the stitches that are on our left needle. And this is just how we join back in the round. So we have our 1 and then we knit 3, so 4 stitches total on that right hand needle. And then we just begin working from the left needle like so. Just knit all those stitches, and now we're officially joined back in the round, and those thumb stitches are there to be worked later. They'll just hang out for a bit, and we're going to be working in the round even for a little bit. The length depends on the size of mitten you're making, but just all knit all the stitches every row, no increases, until your mitten is the length that you need, a little bit less than the length that you need it to be. Depending on your size, it will be about 2 inches less than your desired length. So as you can see here, we have it joined in the round, our thumb stitches there, and then just tuck down that little scrap yarn that you're holding aside. So as I mentioned, we're just going to be working in the round even now. You can see your left hand and your right hand based on the thumb placement, and then just continue in the round until it's about 1.5 to 2 inches less than your desired finished length. So this is where I said it's really easy to customize the length of the hand, but it's not quite as easy to customize the width of the hand. So if you're making these mittens for someone with really long or really short hands, you can measure their hand at this point, and adjust their mitten accordingly. So just knit these stitches, make sure you don't lose any of those cast on stitches because they're just a little bit small there hanging out, and now continue across just like so. We're officially joined in the round, back to our original count, our original stitch count as well. So continuing across that row, knitting every stitch. You can see just how that thumb looks set aside. So here's where we'll be working now, just even. This is the part we're on. The left hand and the right hand both are the same for this point. It's just in the round. And then we will work the decreases. So I have my hand completed here in the round, and now we need to begin working those decreases. So the decreases, the counts depend on your size. Just definitely follow along with the pattern so that you know you have the right number of decreases and you do this part correctly. So I'm going to show you how to set up for the decreases. You just want to verify that the first half of your stitches are on the front needle and the second half are on the back needle. If you're working with double pointed needles, you just want to make sure they're divided, the first half between rows, your first and second needle, and then the second half divided between your third and fourth needle. So for the first decrease row, we knit that first stitch, and then we're going to do a slip knit. This is how I work the slip knit. I know there's a lot of ways to work slip knits, but I just go in through that first stitch knitwise and through the back stitch purlwise, and then knit those 2 stitches together like that. It makes it a little bit smoother. I will have a more thorough tutorial for that slip knit technique linked in the description. And then knit across to the 3 stitches before the halfway point. So as I mentioned, you just want to verify the first half of your stitches are on the front needle, the second half are on the back. So 3 stitches left from the halfway point, and then we knit 2 together, just like so, and then knit that next stitch, and now we adjust our needles. So now we have 2 stitches decreased, and that's what's going to shape the top of the hand, give it that tapered look, is just the decreases in the way that we're shaping them. We're decreasing them all the way to the center. So now again, we just repeat the first half of that row. So we knit 1, knit that first stitch on the back half, and then we work a slip slip knit. So in through the first stitch knitwise, the back stitch purlwise, and then knit those 2 stitches together. Again, I will have this slip slip knit tutorial linked if you want to learn how to do your slip slip knit stitch this way. You could also, if you hate slip slip knit, you could do knit 2 together through the back loop. That's also a left leaning decrease. The key thing is you just want a left leaning decrease. So as you can see there, it leans left, and then on the right side your decrease will lean right. So knit until the last 3 stitches of the round, knit those 2 stitches together, and then knit that final stitch. Now we have our first decrease round completed. Adjust your needles, and we will just work 1 round even. Now knit all the stitches. You can see our decrease round, how it's shaped, and just knit 1 round even, and then we'll work another decrease round. So we're going to work, for a few decrease rounds, we work a decrease round every other round, and then we work a few decrease rounds back to back. So it decreases at a faster rate the further up the mitten we get. This gives like that rounded, tapered look. So we're knitting this round even, just knit all the stitches. I'm going to jump ahead a bit here and show you what it looks like. So you can see I have my decrease rounds completed. You do this depending on your size until you have the correct number of stitches remaining. And now we repeat just round 1. So decrease every round until we have 8 stitches remaining. So that's decreasing every round. This just decreases at a faster rate and kind of gives a more tapered curve to the top of that mitten. So knit those stitches all the way across to the last 3, and then we knit 2 together, slip slip knit, knit to last 3, knit 2 together, knit 1, and then repeat for the second half of the stitches, just as we've done up until this point. Your decreases are a little bit tighter when you're working them back to back like this, and that is normal. Don't be alarmed if they're tighter and a little bit hard to work. It's just because you're decreasing so fast. So now repeat that decrease row. Just knit 1, slip slip knit, knit to the last 3, knit 2 together, knit 1, as we've done up until this point. So for a couple sizes you will have to like adjust, and when you're following around the pattern, along with the pattern, you will see, you just really need to make sure you're following the pattern for your size so that you're getting the right number of stitches, because this pattern, since it is not one size fits all, there's different sizes. You just have to make sure you're keeping the right stitch count for your size. So knit to the last 3, knit 2 together, and then knit 1. And you can see just each row we get smaller and smaller, fewer and fewer stitches. So adjust those needles and complete those rows based on your size to get that tapered top look. So you can see here, letting it focus, we're tapering up to the top, and then we're going to seam the very top stitches, and I will show you how to do that here now. So we're finishing up we have 1 more row of decreases. So this is our very final decrease round. We have 12 stitches at this point. And you can see after this row, our decreases will actually touch. So our slip slip knit will be right next to our knit 2 together. And that's what we want. So knit 1, slip slip knit, again. It's pretty tight here, but that's okay. And then knit 2 together. And knit that next stitch. So now we just have the 4 stitches on this front half. You can see our decreases are right next to each other, exactly what we want to see. And then we adjust our needles, and the back row we're going to be doing the same way. So knit 1 and then our slip slip knit, just like so. And I do like to keep this final row a little bit tighter just so that it doesn't get loose at the beginning, which is fine too. You can just knit this last row a little bit tighter if you want. It's not necessary, but knit those 2 together and then knit 1. So now we just have our 8 stitches. So 4 on the front, 4 on the back. So for the final round, there's actually 2 ways that we can do this. You can do the Kitchener stitch, which is what I'm going to show you, or you can just cinch through those final stitches and weave through those final stitches and then cinch it tight to close. I think the Kitchener stitch looks really nice, but cinching them closed is fine too. So to set up that final round, we're just gonna knit 2, and then we're going to adjust the needles so that the next 4 are on one needle and the second 4 are on another needle. So it's basically like each of the ribs coming together. So knit 2 and then adjust our needles. So just pull those both out, and then you have to re-separate at the halfway point. So pull that cord through, or kind of push, I guess you could say. So now it just looks like the 2 ribs on either side of the hand are coming together towards the center, as you can see here. And then we weave in, the Kitchener stitch is done using the tail of our yarn. So I'll show you kind of the difference between Kitchener stitch and just weaving it through and cinching closed so that you can kind of decide which one you want to do. If you look here, this is Kitchener stitch, so it's like those ribs are just joined together at the top. You can see it's just like one seamless piece. And then on the other sample, that's the way I'm going to show you, is Kitchener stitch. Just like so. It kind of looks like a seamless like rib join that goes up to the top and down the other side. And then if you just want to weave them through and then cinch tight to close, that works as well. You just thread that strand through each stitch, and then you just pull it tight and weave in that end on the inside, and it just kind of like tightens it at the top and leaves a little, like, it looks like a star almost. Either way works. Kitchener stitch is a little bit more complicated. I know not everyone likes it, but if you make socks or some other mitten patterns, Kitchener stitch is kind of common and you might be familiar with it, but I will walk you through and show you how to do Kitchener stitch quickly here. It's not as hard as you would think. It just takes a little bit more focus. So just cut your yarn, leaving a tail, and then weave through on your tapestry needle. And we will just sew together those front and those back stitches. So I have the steps listed here. So we will slip those stitches through with our needle, as noted here. So we're going to go purlwise through that front stitch and leave it on the needle. I'll show you what I mean here. You just thread that strand of yarn through that first stitch. I'm going to zoom in so you can see really closely. So purlwise through the front stitch, and then don't take it off the needle. Just leave it on the needle like that, and kind of tighten it up because that tail is connected to the back stitch. So you don't want it to be super loose. And then knitwise through that back stitch, leave that on the needle. just like so. And now we take off the stitches. So knitwise through that front stitch and take it off. So slip it knitwise and then just slip it off that needle as you go. And then purlwise through the front and leave it on right there. Again, just leave this one on. And now we go purlwise through the back and take it off. And then the next one knitwise through the back and leave it on. So those last 4 steps, those 4 kind of in the center noted here, you repeat those stitches or those steps across all of the stitches. And then when you have 2 stitches left, then you work the instructions at the end for the last stitches. So just repeat as we've been doing. I've been doing Kitchener stitch for years and I still need to glance at the directions to start out. So if you feel like it's confusing and hard to memorize, that's totally fine and okay. You do kind of get the hang of it once you get going, but setting it up is always a little bit tricky. But it doesn't take long unless you're doing it across tons of stitches. It's not that bad. Just go slowly, slow and steady. Try not to make any mistakes because it is kind of hard to take out and redo, of course. And work all the way across those stitches. I'm going to zoom forward just a little bit because those 4 in the center are a little bit repetitive. You can still see what I'm doing, but it's a little bit faster. So now we have we're getting to the last stitch. So the last stitch on the front, purlwise, then we have to do that stitch. And now that last stitch on the back, knitwise. So now we have just 2 stitches. So this is where those final 2 steps come in. You just have to make sure you do those nice and steady, those final 2 stitches. And then that back one and slide it off. And now you can see how we have our Kitchener stitch. You can kind of stretch it a little bit, stretch it out, adjust it, and make sure your tension looks nicely. You don't want to do it too tight or too loose because it won't look quite as good. But now we just put that strand to the back of the work and then we have to weave in our end. And that's it. That's completing the top of the mitten. So weave in that end. You can see here we have our piece worked, our Kitchener stitch. It looks really nice. You can kind of adjust it, just maneuver it around the way you like it. And we have that nice curved tapered top. So now you can't forget about the thumb. We still have the thumb to work, and this is our final part of the mitten. And the thumb goes really fast. So there's a few little details that I want to point out to you just so that you get it right and don't have any problems, but it's very fast. The thumb, you'll be able to quickly just finish up. So with that stitch marker still on, or that scrap yarn or stitch holder, just slide those stitches onto your needle once more. So this is still our size 5 needle. Just slide those stitches on to the needle. Depending on your size, you'll have between 13 and 17 stitches. And I do this while the scrap yarn is still on, just so that it's a little bit easier and I don't have to worry about dropping any of those stitches, especially the increased ones. So adjust your needles when necessary. So you can see I pulled my needle out and then I'm still working on the cord because I'm doing this part backwards, or I mean magic loop as well. So those end ones do have a tendency to get a little bit tight like that. But if you just kind of pull on either side of that scrap yarn, it'll pull that stitch back up so you can see where it is. That's another benefit of the scrap yarn. Stitch holders will kind of do a better job of holding them up and not letting them kind of fall down through the previous stitch. But again, I just use scrap yarn because it's easier. So once you have all those stitches, make sure you have them all. I definitely count at this point. Then you can snip that yarn and pull through just remove it off of that needle like so, because we don't need the scrap yarn anymore. They're secured with our needle. So we have to pick up a few stitches. I'll show you what that kind of looks like here. Those stitches we cast on, we can't just work across those. We need to pick those up. And then we're going to do just 2 decrease rows to kind of make like a thumb gusset so that the thumb has a 3D fit. You can see here, there's like that little partial triangle piece. You can see where we picked up the stitches and then how it shapes up. This is really simple. It looks way more complicated than it is, but it's just 3 simple rows. The hardest part is probably picking up the stitches, but it's really not even that hard and you only have to pick up a few. So we cast on 3 stitches. So then we're going to pick up actually 6. So this is 4 stitches across the 3 that were picked up and then 1 stitch on either side of the rows. So if you kind of spread it apart here, you can see the 3 stitches that we cast on. And each of those 3 stitches kind of shapes a V. And in the center of the V is where we're picking up. So it'll look super seamless. So you can see the first V there, and then that's where we're picking up into that first V. And then you can see the next V, each one. So although we cast on 3, it's 4 because it's in a different orientation because they're facing a different way, if that makes sense. It will make more sense when you're doing it and you can kind of see what I mean. But there's the V. So we just pick up in the V. There should be 2 strands of yarn. So the cast on edge and then the strand that's in the V itself. And then not only are we picking up those 4, but we're picking up 1 along either side of the rows. This just makes it so that there isn't a hole there. If you weren't picking up along the side of the rows as well, you would have a hole. There would be a gap. So you can see there's our final V, and then next to the final V is the row. Yep, just like that, into that row there. So now I'm actually going to pick them up now that I showed you which ones. We will begin in that row stitch that we found right there. Insert your hook. And this is how I pick up my stitches. Yeah, I just pick it up and then pull up a loop. It's pretty simple. You don't really need another needle, but you can use another needle. I know everyone picks up a little bit differently. So then that next stitch there, you see the first V, and then we just need to pick up the stitch that's in the center of the V. So insert the hook into the wide part of the V, if that makes sense. And that just keeps the stitches looking super seamless. They'll look the same orientation as they do going the other direction. So there's our next V, and we pick up that stitch as well. So again, we're picking up 6 stitches. This is our 3rd picked up stitch. And you'll have 2 strands on that needle and then pull it through. So another picked up stitch. Continue all the way across just like this, just for those 4 along the 3 cast on edge. And then also the 2 on the sides, just as I noted. So you can count, it's pretty obvious where you've been picking up because you have that tail right there. So 1 on the side, and then we have our stitches across, 1 more right there. And now we have to pick up that stitch on the edge again. Right like so. Just pick up in both of the strands on that edge stitch. If you grab just 1, it'll be a little bit too loose, but if you grab 2, it will hold it more securely and there won't develop a hole because it won't be pulling any strand too tight, if that makes sense. Just try to pick up in, there will be 2 strands Generally when you pick up stitches, there's always 2 strands. There could be more depending on your cast on edge, but it's another reason I like backwards loop, is it's not too bulky. So you can adjust your needles at this point so that your magic loop is a little bit more even if you need, so that you have a similar number of stitches on the front and the back loop. But now to finish up this row, what we're going to do is we're just going to knit, or finish up this round, we're just going to knit until one before the stitch that was picked up. So if you can't find your stitch that was picked up, just look for the tail of the yarn. It will be pretty obvious when you get to it. So just one stitch before the stitch that was picked up. Knit all the way through those thumb stitches. You can see here I'm adjusting my magic loop so that I had a lot of stitches on the front needle and not that many on the back. So it was just a little bit more difficult, a little more tricky. And now I'm working across like so. And then this stitch, I'm actually just going to adjust. I want another stitch at the back as well to make it a little bit more even and smooth. So this tail, I just kind of tuck it on the inside so that it's out of the way right now. And I wait till the end to weave in. Another good thing about waiting till the end to weave in the tail is that if there is a spot where you have a little hole or a little bit of gapping, you can kind of seal that where you weave in the end. And you can see here, now I know where to knit to because one stitch before that picked up stitch. So the one connected to that tail is the picked up stitch. So I'm knitting, I have 3 more stitches to knit for this row. So knit to 1 before the picked up stitch, and then we're going to do just a couple decreases. So this also seals up any hole that we might otherwise have because it kind of overlaps the 2 stitches that would, where a hole would generally form. So 1 before that picked up stitch, and I'm actually going to place a marker here. So this will kind of denote our beginning and end of each round. So right there, and now we have to slip, slip, knit. So decrease 1 stitch. Just like that. And now we knit 4. So we have that first decrease. Now we knit 4 just across those stitches that we picked up. And this is, those decreases there are actually what's shaping that little triangle thumb gusset that I showed you earlier as well. So now we have the next 2 stitches and we have to knit these 2 together. So one of these is a stitch that we picked up, and then one of them is a stitch that just has existed around the edge of the thumb. And again, this seals up any hole that may have otherwise formed and just overlaps those 2 stitches. So after you knit those 2 together, we're going to insert, place a stitch marker, and then we're going to knit to the end of the round. So just adjust our needles. You can kind of see how our thumb is forming. So knit across those back thumb stitches to the end of the round, adjust once more. And now we're knitting to that marker, slip the marker, and then we just knit 1 full round even. So we're not decreasing again this round, we will next round, but just knit 1 even. The back stitches as well. So I'm going to zoom forward a little bit here just because it's a little bit repetitive again. So just knit across those back stitches and then adjust your needles. And now we work 1 more decrease round just to shape that little gusset. And again, our decreases are noted by the markers. So knit to the marker, knit to the end of the round, just those few stitches, and then just like so, slip that marker, and now you have to do another decrease row, so, or decrease stitch. So slip, slip, knit right there to shape that gusset, and now knit 2, the next 2 stitches, and then knit the next 2 together, just like that. So now that is our thumb gusset formed. That little triangle piece that I showed you before, kind of just to give that thumb a 3-dimensional look. And so slip that marker, and now we just knit the thumb in the round until it is as long as we need it. I do have each of the lengths noted in the pattern, but you can again modify this if you want it to be longer or shorter. So just continue knitting the thumb in the round at this point. Pretty straightforward. And then that is our thumb gusset. So you can see here on this is the other piece, and then we are just doing the part where we weave in through those stitches and cinch it closed to end. We do work one final decrease round before we, or one decrease round before we weave in. So knit 1, and then for our final round, and then knit 2 together all the way around the thumb. So we're decreasing here just so we have fewer stitches before we thread through to finish. So knit 2 together all the way across those thumb stitches, and then adjust and do the same to the back stitches, like so. I try and keep these a little bit tight again, just so that the thumb doesn't have any opening or holes at the top, just to make it extra warm. Always trying to avoid holes with mittens. Keep them nice and cozy. So knit 2 together across. Be careful not to drop any stitches. I'm working really close to the end of the needles. You don't have to do that, but like I said, I try to keep these pretty tight. And then our final knit 2 together, like so. So we just have a couple stitches now, and these are the ones that we weave through to cinch our thumb closed. So adjust those needles, cut that yarn, and then thread that strand onto your needle, your tapestry needle, and just weave through those ends to complete. So slip onto each of those thumb stitches, and this secures them and just holds them in place. So you're going to thread through each of these stitches, cinch it tight to close, and then weave in that end. You can tie a knot if you're using an acrylic or like a more slippery yarn. You might want to tie in a knot. But if you're using a wool, especially a non-superwash wool like this, you probably don't need to tie in a knot because it kind of holds its place a little bit better. It's a little bit more grippy. So just cinch those stitches closed and then weave in that end. I always just go right through the center there and then pull it through, and also weave in the end from where you started, picked up your thumb stitches to complete the mitten. Weave in these ends securely. Again, if you're using a acrylic or like a cotton yarn, you might need to do it a little bit more thoroughly. Just make sure you get it really nice and tight and secure. pull it taut, and then that next to where you picked up the stitches, if you find that you have any holes or any loosened parts right here, you can take this as an opportunity to kind of seal those up. I kept mine pretty tight, but in case you see one that's a little looser, just follow that stitch, follow that strand, and you can seal it up at this point. So now we have our right and our left mitten. You've completed your vanilla mittens, and I hope that you've enjoyed this pattern. Please be sure to comment and let me know if you have any questions, and please subscribe to stay up to date on any new videos and tutorials that we might have. Thanks so much for watching. Enjoy!